thought my video response phase was done after one episode, but no. Chit of Headings here for you again. How are you doing, friends? Ready to dive into some more intense anamorphic misconceptions? Last Monday, StudioBinder, the production management software company, released a video on what is anamorphic in their channel. You can imagine my surprise to find some of my own shots in there. I'm not stingy when it comes to people taking my stuff, but I do get upset when they don't ask for it or don't give proper credit. So we filed a copyright claim and took the video down. For the Anamorphic cookbook, I used clips from all over the place, but they always have a tag letting people know where to find the original material. But instead of just being angry, let's objectively address the issues in StudioBinder's video. If you are as passionate as I am, join the channel for a lot more content that you can unlock right now. StudioBinder's video essay about anamorphics opens with a big establishing shot from Blade Runner. This one and all other VFX shots in Blade Runner were actually shot on 65mm spherical. This shot may set a moody tone, but it's falling on its face right out of the gate in terms of showcasing their concept of anamorphic versus spherical. On their merits, StudioBinder's analysis of the lens choices for Wolf of Wall Street, mixing anamorphic and spherical, is great and a good explanation on creative lensing. These graphics for lens distortion are also super cool. If we look at the animations and the overall attention to detail, this video has great production value and it could be a great learning tool.
Let's jump in.
Here's one of my shots. It fits right in, doesn't it?
Meaning the elements inside the lens are circular.
Not to be pedantic, but circles and spheres are not the same thing. There's a whole third dimension to it that we're missing out with circular elements.
The studios had to give them something they couldn't get at home. A massive and wide image. But there's a problem.
Then we see a sample of the robe. There are two issues here. First and foremost, the robe is squished. This is how it's actually supposed to look. Two, there were other anamorphic films before, just not in Hollywood. The French short To Build a Fire from 1927 is the first actual recorded use of anamorphics in film for a wider screen. After those two errors, we segue straight into squeeze factors presented in the most incorrect way. 1 to 3, 1 to 3, 3, 2 to 0. Why are these squeeze factors written like ratios? I'm sure they meant 1.3 times, 1.33 times, 1.8 times, and 2 times squeezes. Aspect ratios are an entirely different thing, and it's important not to conflate the two.
Spherical lenses have less glass elements inside. This gives light a consistent and direct path through the lens, creating a sharp and undistorted image.
Unfortunately, this is a very common misconception, that more glass is more bad. That every piece of glass that you add to your system makes your performance worse. It is a false idea, and a lot of people still cling to it. This is enough subject for an entire video, so I'll leave it at this here. Are you trying to say that a size 50mm f1.4 photo lens with 7 elements is better and or cleaner than a Leica Summilux C cinema lens with 18 to 22 elements because it has less glass? Or is that an argument that much older designs are better, like the Petzval lens, which uses 4 elements? Here's some samples taken with Lomography's redesigned Petzval. Would you say that this is sharp, undistorted performance because it's spherical and it has less glass? I don't think so.
Anamorphic lenses have more glass elements inside, and the elements are squeezed into an oval shape.
What does this even mean? Anamorphics use cylindrical glass. When looking through the front of an anamorphic lens, you see an oval picture because of this squeeze. But the elements are not ovals themselves. Light has a straight path through spherical lenses and an irregular path on anamorphics. I don't even know what to say here. For real, let's just look at these animations again because they're kind of cute, and then erase this idea from our minds.
Can we add something and more substance here?
Okay, sure. But let's borrow something from John Hess at Filmmaker IQ to help us. In this video, The History and Science of Lenses, John actually builds several little lens examples. None of them anamorphic, mind you, but you can see lots of crazy reflections coming off the elements as they move around. So sphericals also have lots of light kicking around. Later, John explains these reflections cause big losses in light transmission.
By 1939, an artificial coating was developed at Zeiss to cut down reflections as much as 66%.
So by the time anamorphics start rolling around in Hollywood in the 1950s and 60s, the industry is already tackling this stray light. So looking at this animation, it looks like we're tracing the light rays on the first one and then tracing reflections on the second one. Different things.
Bokeh are unfocused points of light.
All right, yeah, let's talk about bokeh.
In a spherical lens, the bokeh is circular.
That's a flare, not bokeh.
Distortion is a byproduct of anamorphic lenses due to the irregular shape of the lens elements.
I'm sure you've shot with non-rectilinear wide angles before Laowa came around. Are you saying those are less spherical lenses? Have you ever seen a GoPro distortion? Is that not spherical? Distortion per se has to do more with optical design than with anamorphic or spherical. What most anamorphics have regarding distortion is a non-linear factor across the frame, which makes them extra tough to work in post-production. Sure, it also makes the lines go bendy towards the edges.
Another visual characteristic of anamorphic lenses is called fall-off. When the image loses focus, the further away from the center you go.
Going into fall off, which is just a word if not used to describe anything, like all lenses have light fall off towards the edges, for example. But what you're trying to talk about here is focus fall off, which is most common with adapters, vintage anamorphics, SLR Magic's rangefinder, and cheap DIY focusers. Again, we have 65mm spherical footage of Blade Runner to describe something softer. Plus, you can totally see the non-anamorphic lens flares here. Back to focus fall off, sphericals have that too, as you can see in these test shots using rehoused Bosch and Lomb Baltar lenses from the 1930s. Or again, if we look at the earlier Petzval design in which the focus fall off is considered a feature, not a bug. StudioBinder's says
Anamorphic lenses can also create a subtle vignetting effect.
Again, incorrect. But I can see why you would think that. Vignetting is a big issue with anamorphic adapters. But the examples used look more like the lenses aren't covering the entire imaging area, such as using a micro four thirds lens on a Super 35 sensor, just like what's happening on this Vazen 28mm test shot. The vignetting is not from the anamorphic lens. It's from the fact that this lens is not made to cover this big of a sensor, although it almost does. In situations like this, cinematographers might choose to embrace the vignetting as part of the look, but it's definitely not that it comes from anamorphics. You can get the same from sphericals too.
Lens flares are another selling point for getting a more cinematic look shooting with anamorphics, and created by the additional glass elements in the anamorphic lens construction, which is why flares are less prominent in spherical lenses.
When they say anamorphic flares are created by the additional glass in anamorphic lenses, and that these flares are less prominent in sphericals because of less glass, then you're trying on my nerves. Anamorphics don't imply flares. As shown in the cookbook, front anamorphics create streak flares, while middle or rear anamorphics don't. StudioBinder uses footage of John Wick's motorcycle chase to showcase anamorphic flares. Fun fact, John Wick 2 was shot using Ari's master anamorphics, which flare so little the DP, Lostson, had to use a streak filter to get them to flare. Lots of sphericals flare like crazy too. Just look at anything Russian, or the Baltars again.
The longer focal length of the anamorphic also yields a shallower depth of field.
This is another can of worms and a common misconception. When using an identical focal length and camera placement to match the vertical framing, bokeh on anamorphics is actually smaller than spherical because of the compression. But if we are talking about matching the horizontal frame, then we could be a bit closer to the truth. For example, here's a shot on a 21mm spherical with top and bottom chopped off. Then a matching, or almost, frame on an anamorphic 40mm lens. Now I'm using a longer focal length in anamorphic, but only because I'm discarding a massive part of my shot in the spherical framing. It boils down if we are matching the height or the width of the original frame we're comparing to.
Anamorphic lenses are usually more expensive and heavier than spherical lenses.
Do they mean that in general? I get it if we're comparing the same focal lengths, but again, in the cine lens world, we can talk about Atlas making anamorphics at 10 grand and Leica making bigger, heavier, and pricier sphericals. This is a very dangerous generalization that doesn't help anyone.
Anamorphic lenses also have more trouble focusing at close distances than their spherical counterparts.
All right, that's correct.
To counteract this, anamorphic diopters can be used.
Oh, and here are my shots again. Anamorphic diopters don't exist. Diopters are auxiliary lenses, but also get called filters a lot. And they are very useful when shooting anamorphic, but they are not anamorphic. They're also useful for getting closer when shooting spherical without a macro lens. This should be it. I think I addressed everything. If you want to help me counter misinformation about anamorphics, this is a good video to share with your cinematographer and camera friends. Before I go, there's still this gem right here, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about it in the comments below.
The anamorphic artifacts create softer and rougher images.
What do they mean by softer and rougher? Those are pretty much opposite words. Anyway, join the channel to hear more about anamorphics, or just share the video and help me get the info out there. Thank you so much for hanging out, and I hope you learned something cool here today. Chitterverhardings, out.
Cuddy McCutterson.
Cuddy McCarrison.